Karen blames disabled person for breaking glass, but camera shows she did it. Part 1. Pineview Ridge looked like something out of a brochure. Rows of identical homes with pristine lawns, flower beds that bloomed in coordinated colors, and sidewalks so smooth they practically whispered, "No skateboards allowed." On the outside, it was everything a suburban dream should be. For Malcolm Rhodes, it was supposed to be a place to heal. He had moved into the community just 6 months earlier. A decorated paramedic, Malcolm had spent most of his 30s responding to emergency calls, until a collapsed building during a disaster relief deployment left him with a spinal cord injury and permanent mobility issues. Now he used a quiet electric scooter to get around. No drama, no demands. Just quiet days tending to his tomatoes in the shared community garden, reading on the clubhouse patio, and nodding politely at neighbors who didn't look twice. Except one always looked twice. Karen Ellsworth, HOA president, neighborhood watchdog, and self-appointed guardian of the way things should be. From the very first week Malcolm moved in, Karen had clocked every detail. His parking permit, the unsightly basket on the front of his scooter, even the way he'd slightly adjusted the mailbox height to make it easier to reach. She called it non-compliant modification. He called it reaching his mail without pain. They'd had small run-ins, nothing major. But Malcolm noticed her tone. Always clipped. Always just short of accusing. The kind of voice that made you feel guilty before you'd done anything wrong. Then came the glass. It happened on a Monday afternoon. The sun was hot but forgiving, and Malcolm had parked himself on the clubhouse patio with a book and a cold drink, nodding hello to a few neighbors coming and going. He was seated under the pergola, quietly flipping pages, when a sudden crash shattered the peace. Literally, glass, somewhere behind him, loud and unmistakable. He turned quickly and saw a large decorative pane that lined the clubhouse entrance, shattered in a spiderweb pattern from the base upward. A few ceramic planters were knocked over nearby. Some guests rushed over, trying to figure out what had happened. Then came Karen, red-faced, breath short, heels clacking against the patio bricks. She appeared from around the corner holding her purse in one hand and a clipboard in the other. Classic Karen. "Who was sitting out here?" she demanded. Malcolm raised a brow, still seated. "I was." She stared at him, nostrils flaring. "Then I assume you'll be taking responsibility for this damage." He blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "I saw you," she said. "You turned too sharply and that little scooter of yours hit the planter, knocked it into the glass. Honestly, those things are dangerous in small spaces. It's a safety violation." Malcolm sat in stunned silence. People around them stopped moving. Someone whispered. A couple quietly backed away toward their cars. Karen folded her arms, her voice louder now. "I'll be filing an incident report. You will be expected to pay for the damage, and pending review by the HOA board, your clubhouse access will be suspended." He stared at her. "I didn't hit anything." "Then what? The wind knocked over a concrete planter?" she snapped. "There's no one else here, Mr. Rhodes." He looked down at his wheels. Perfectly aligned. No scrapes. No debris. "You sure you saw what you think you saw?" Karen scoffed. "I was here. I know what I saw." But she wasn't. That much he was sure of. Still, the accusation stuck. By that evening, the HOA had issued a temporary suspension notice pending further investigation. Rumors flew. Neighbors started whispering. One woman from down the street awkwardly avoided eye contact when she passed him by the mailbox. He said nothing. He didn't retaliate. He didn't post online. Instead, he made one quiet phone call to Mike Tran, a younger resident on the HOA tech committee. A good guy, friendly, always respectful. "Hey, Mike," Malcolm said calmly. "You mentioned a few weeks back that the clubhouse got new cameras installed, right?" Mike paused. "Yeah, they just activated them last week. Do you know if there's footage from today, around 2 p.m.? I can check. Why?" Malcolm exhaled. "Because I'd really like to know what Karen actually saw." Part 2. Mike Tran didn't sleep well that night. After his call with Malcolm, he kept replaying what had happened in his head. The shattered glass, Karen's accusation, Malcolm's voice, steady, calm, but carrying the weight of someone used to not being believed. Mike hadn't been at the clubhouse during the incident, but he had no doubt something was off. Early the next morning, he used his HOA login to access the security footage archive. The cameras were brand new, motion sensor triggered, high resolution, and cloud backed up. Installed just 2 weeks ago after Karen had insisted the clubhouse was too vulnerable to misuse. He clicked through the files, scrolling to Monday, 1:58 p.m. And there it was, Karen rounding the corner of the patio, purse heavy over her shoulder, distractedly adjusting a large ceramic planter with one foot. She stumbled slightly, caught her heel, overcorrected, and slammed sideways into the glass panel with her tote bag. The pane shook, then spiderwebbed from the impact. Her clipboard hit the ground. She stood there for several seconds, visibly flustered, looked around, picked up her clipboard. Then she turned and walked in the opposite direction, out of frame. 2 minutes later, she reappeared from the other side of the building, stormed onto the patio, and pointed at Malcolm. Mike leaned back in his chair, horrified. Wow! By 10 a.m., he had emailed the footage to the full HOA board with a short message. Subject: urgent, clubhouse incident footage. This video speaks for itself. Mike. He also forwarded a copy to Malcolm. At noon, an emergency HOA meeting was scheduled. Word spread fast. By 6 p.m., the community clubhouse was packed. More people showed up than anyone had seen in years. Retired couples, young professionals, families with kids, veterans with walkers. Some folks brought folding chairs from home. Karen sat at the front, stiff-backed, wearing her signature white blazer and a frozen smile. Malcolm wheeled in quietly and sat near the door. Mike stepped to the projector and said only one sentence. I believe the truth matters. He hit play. The room was silent as the footage rolled. Karen fumbling with the planter. Karen stumbling. Karen crashing into the glass. Karen collecting herself, looking around. Karen turning away, only to re-enter minutes later and point at Malcolm. The silence afterward was thunderous. Karen tried to speak. I must have remembered it wrong. A woman stood. You remembered wrong and filed a false report? Another voice. You lied about a disabled man breaking property? Someone else. What if there weren't cameras? Karen turned to the board. This is being blown out of proportion. But the board wasn't with her anymore. Linda, a longtime resident and newly appointed vice chair, cleared her throat. Karen, this is not a misunderstanding. It's misconduct, and it's not the first time your actions have caused harm. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Then Deshaun Carter stood up. Yes, that Deshaun from the gym incident months prior. I don't live here anymore, he said, but I saw this story online and came back because this isn't about one lie. This is about how people like Malcolm, people with disabilities, people of color, people who are different, get painted as problems. He looked directly at Karen, and how quickly we believe them when they point a finger. The crowd erupted in applause. Karen's face was pale. The power she once held in every clipped word, every threat of violation, every smug smile, was gone. Linda took the mic again. Effective immediately, Karen Ellsworth is suspended from her position as HOA president, pending a formal removal vote. Malcolm, on behalf of this board, we deeply apologize. But Malcolm wasn't looking for apologies. He nodded once, then wheeled himself out of the room. Outside, a few neighbors caught up with him. One brought a slice of pie. Another offered a hug. A teenager handed him a handwritten note that read, I want to be like you when I grow up. Malcolm smiled quietly. Let's just try to be better than what came before. Part 3. Karen Ellsworth did not resign. Even after being suspended by the board and humiliated in front of the entire neighborhood, she refused to step down quietly. She still had allies. At least, she thought she did. A few older residents who remembered the time she coordinated the Christmas lights competition. Others who didn't like how political things had gotten lately. So she got to work. She spent the next week drafting newsletters, printing them herself and stuffing them into mailboxes by hand. She called it Karen's Corner, the truth the board won't tell you. In her carefully worded essay, she framed the incident as an unfortunate misstep, blamed bias against traditional leadership, and even hinted that the security footage had been edited to damage her credibility. She accused Malcolm of playing the sympathy card and claimed the board had been hijacked by a wave of performative outrage. She ended the letter with, I've given 8 years of my life to Pineview Ridge. If you want to see this community run by social media mobs and baseless emotion, then stand aside. But if you value order, safety, and standards, we need to talk. Some people read it, fewer agreed. Most shook their heads in disbelief. One resident, Maya Rodriguez, took a photo of the letter and posted it on the community forum with the caption, "When denial becomes a hobby." But Malcolm said nothing. He continued his days like he always had, quietly, purposefully. He resumed tending to the garden. He waved to kids riding their bikes. He spoke kindly to the same people who had once avoided him at the mailbox, and perhaps because he didn't react, others did. A group of residents launched a petition to make the HOA board's internal meetings public. Another group proposed a community care council that would focus on inclusivity, conflict resolution, and accessibility audits, ensuring that no one in the neighborhood would be marginalized or falsely accused again. They named Malcolm as honorary chair. He politely declined the title, but he did show up to every meeting, often sitting near the back, offering thoughtful suggestions when asked. One morning, a neighbor named Rachel, a single mom who had been afraid to speak up during Karen's time, knocked on Malcolm's door with tears in her eyes. "I never thanked you," she said, "for standing up to her, for not yelling, for not walking away." Malcolm smiled. "We all stand up differently. I just stayed sitting." It became a running joke around the neighborhood. Malcolm stayed sitting meant he held his ground with grace. Karen, meanwhile, grew more isolated. The board held an official vote. Her removal was finalized, unanimous. Her remaining supporters began to distance themselves, not out of sudden realization, but self-preservation. The final blow came when the HOA announced a new annual award, the Pineview Pillar, for community integrity and courage. The first recipient, Malcolm Rhodes. At the next neighborhood gathering, dozens of residents came out to the garden patio, where Malcolm liked to read. The kids decorated it with posters. One read, "Thank you for standing strong." Another, "Truth matters." When Malcolm rolled up, someone handed him a small plaque. He looked at it, then at the crowd, quiet as always. "I didn't want this," he said softly, "but I'm honored. And if what happened to me made any of us stop and think before we judge someone, it was worth it." He held up the plaque. "But next year, let's give this to a kid who stood up for someone else, or a neighbor who brings extra soup. That's what makes a community." Applause erupted, real, unforced, full of warmth. That evening, Karen watched from her kitchen window. The laughter, the clapping, the person she once tried to frame for a broken window, now the most respected figure on the block. For the first time, she felt something she didn't recognize. Not anger, not superiority. Shame. Part 4. By early fall, Pineview Ridge didn't look all that different on the surface. Lawns were still trimmed. Porch lights still glowed warm at sunset. The HOA newsletter still arrived on the first of every month. But if you look closer, something had shifted. Something real. The tone had changed. The whispers at the mailbox? Gone. Now neighbors stopped to ask each other how their week was going. The meetings? No longer dominated by a single voice. They were collaborative, often lively, sometimes emotional, but always respectful. Even the clubhouse bulletin board had been redone, replacing HOA warnings and passive-aggressive policy printouts with resident art, community events, and a new monthly spotlight called Neighbor to Know. The first featured Malcolm Rhodes. It told his story, not just of the glass incident, but of the quiet strength he'd shown since moving in. How he never once raised his voice, never demanded justice. He simply let the truth speak, and it did. After her removal from the board, Karen Ellsworth remained in Pineview Ridge, but rarely left her house. She no longer walked the perimeter in her signature heels. No more surprise property checks. No more emails flagged urgent over flower beds or flag placements. Some pitied her, others avoided her. Most moved on, but inside her well-kept home, Karen stewed in silence. Until one gray Thursday afternoon, Malcolm was at the community garden, picking late-season tomatoes and chatting with two elderly residents about fall planting. He didn't notice Karen until she spoke. "I know you don't want to see me," she said from the path. He turned. She stood awkwardly, no clipboard, no stiff posture. Her hands were empty. I don't want anything, he replied evenly. I know, she said. That's what makes this harder. A long silence passed between them. I came to tell you, she continued. I watched that footage again and again, and I couldn't believe how easily I convinced myself I had seen something else. Maybe I didn't want to believe I made that mistake. She looked down. I was wrong, deeply, and I hurt you. Malcolm nodded once. Yes, you did. Karen looked up. Her voice cracked. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to say it, out loud. For the first time since they met, she didn't sound like a person reciting rules. She sounded human. I'm not interested in punishing you, Malcolm said quietly. I just wanted the truth out there. It is, Karen whispered. Everyone saw it, including me. She turned to leave. Malcolm looked back down at the tomato vines. Karen, she stopped. There's a fall cleanup next week. We'll be replanting along the garden path. There's room for one more set of hands. She looked over, unsure. He didn't smile. He just nodded once, then returned to his harvest. The next week, Karen showed up in old jeans and gardening gloves. She didn't speak much, just pulled weeds beside a woman whose name she never learned before. And when she stood to stretch, she saw Malcolm rolling along the other side of the fence, laughing with kids helping to plant carrots. No one stared at her, but no one praised her either. And somehow, that was exactly right. That fall, Pineview Ridge rewrote parts of its HOA charter. A new rule was added. No resident shall be publicly accused of wrongdoing without evidence. Truth and dignity shall guide all actions of the board. It was called Rhodes' Clause, unanimously passed. And Malcolm? He never asked for it. He didn't need credit, power, or a position. He just wanted space to exist without suspicion, and maybe to grow a few tomatoes in peace. One afternoon, a child rolled past him on a scooter and shouted, Hi, Mr. Malcolm. You're famous. He laughed. I'd rather be quiet. Too late, the kid said with a grin and zipped away. Malcolm watched him go, the breeze rustling the autumn leaves. He exhaled. The truth, it turned out, had longer roots than any lie. And in a place once ruled by silence and fear, it was finally growing.